This Shabbos is the Shabbos before Purim. We read Parshas Tetzaveh. Parshas Tetzaveh is about the big day Kehuna, the clothing of the Kohanim, the Kohen Gadol, and the other Kohanim, what they wore when they did their service in the Mishkan and later on in the Beis Hamikdash. So, is there any connection that we could find between Parshas Tetzaveh and the upcoming holiday of Purim? The Ramban says yes, and it's a fascinating one. When the Torah talks about the begadim, the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, it notes that at the bottom of the me'il, of the outer garment of the Kohen Gadol, were these pomegranates, these rimonim, and bells, little bells. So these were silver bells and silver pomegranates that when the Kohen Gadol walked, one was able to hear his sound. And the reason that he had these bells, because the pasuk says, "V'nishma kolo b'vo el hakodesh," that when he comes to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when he comes into the Holy of Holies, the holiest place on earth, there should be a noise that sounds that he's not simply walking in, but he's making his appearance known. And the question, of course, for us is, what? Why? Hashem doesn't need to hear the bells of the Kohen Gadol. Hashem sees, he knows exactly where the Kohen Gadol is going. The Kohen Gadol is coming into the Holy of Holies. So what's this all about? So says the Ramban, he says, you can't just walk into a king's domain. It doesn't work like that. And he says, just look as an example. When it came to the Megillah, the most critical moment of the Megillah was that Mordechai hears that the Jewish people are going to be murdered. And he says, Esther, you have to do something. So he says, Esther, go in to Achashverosh and tell him to annul the decree. Save your people. And Esther's response is, Mordechai, if it was only that easy, if it was only that simple. He says, I only go into the king once a month. I don't just simply walk in. You can't just walk into the king's domain. You have to get permission. And not only that, but you have to understand, Mordechai, if you walk in and you don't have permission, the king could kill you. This king's got a history. He already killed Vashti. He'll get rid of me too. So Mordechai hears this. Apparently he must contemplate it. He sends a message back to Esther. He says, Esther, there's no choice here. The Jewish people are facing annihilation. You have no choice but to risk your life and go. And let's hope for the best. So Esther says, okay, Mordechai, I understand. I have to stand up and take this risk and try to save my people. But please, Lech Knosas Kol HaYehudim, gather all of the Jews and please daven. Daven that when I walk in there without permission, when I go into the king's domain, daven that the king should look at me with favor in his eyes, that he should want to speak to me, that I would have the opportunity to talk to him, and that he shouldn't look at me as violating his domain and therefore sentencing me to death. And we know the rest of the story. The Jews davened, they fasted for Esther, and when Esther went in, Esther was able to speak to Achashverosh, and ultimately, as it played out, the decree was annulled and the Jewish people were saved. And this is all because Esther understood that when it came to the king's domain, one didn't simply walk, one had to be very careful, cautious, and have permission in order to go in. So the Kohen Gadol had these bells on the bottom of his me'il so that he would almost be announcing himself going into the king's domain. And if that's true for the king Achashverosh, for a king of flesh and blood, how much more so for the Melech Malchei Hamlachim, for the king of all kings, that when the Kohen Gadol was to enter this holiest spot on earth, the place where Hashem's presence was felt, was present in this world, then the Kohen Gadol needed to make sure that he had permission in order to do so. I think on a certain level, we no longer, of course, have the Mishkan. We no longer, of course, have the Beis Hamikdash. But the Medrash tells us that the Kedusha, the sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash, was spread out, was sent out. A little bit of Kedusha, a little bit of the holiness was sent to every shul in the world. And I think it's important for us as we learn this message, that when we come into shul, we have to prepare ourselves to understand the holiness, the sanctity of the place in which we are going. And if we are able just a little bit to move ourselves just a little bit in being more careful about how we enter shul and how we behave in shul, hopefully our voices, our tefillos, will be heard like the sound of the Kohen Gadol's bells on the bottom of his me'il when he entered the Holy of Holies. Wishing everyone a good Shabbos and a Purim Sameach.